Hey folks, David Tao with barbend.com, and today we have a recap of day 3 of the 2023 Noble CrossFit Games. Today also marks the beginning of individual and team competitions. There were 3 events, so we already have a leaderboard starting to shake out, and some big surprises, including notable names not performing as well or as high on the leaderboard as we might have expected after a few events. So we've got all that and more. Stick around. I do want to give a quick note. Please, if you like this content, you want to stay up to date on all things CrossFit Games and really all things strength, including stuff from the world of powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman, bodybuilding, and more, make sure you subscribe to Barbend on YouTube. Yeah, this channel on YouTube, the thing you're watching right now. Go ahead and make sure you subscribe. All right, let's start with the men, and we're going to start with event 1. This was the mountain bike, or the event simply called Ride. Competitors had to do as many laps on a course as possible in 40 minutes with a Trek mountain bike. And not a huge surprise as to who won this event on the men's side. Joona Koski, who is a European behemoth in the world of CrossFit. We've heard his name at the top for around a decade now. Does very well on endurance events. Notably, Jeffrey Adler of Canada, who's always really in the mix for the top 10, sometimes the top 5, especially as we saw back in the 2020 pandemic CrossFit Games. He finished second in this event. One notable name for the men on the Ride event that's going to come up again and again throughout this broadcast, well, that's Justin Medeiros, the 2-time reigning fittest man on earth. Didn't exactly perform super well in the event, finishing 29th. Now, we've seen ultimate winners of the CrossFit Games come out of the gate a little bit slow, especially on endurance events, these longer endurance events. We've seen the games start with these sorts of rides or runs or rucks or swims in the past. Sometimes you have like a triathlon event. So it's not necessarily indicative of his fitness level. But then again, Justin Medeiros tends to do well on longer monostructural events. After all, you don't get to be the 2-time defending champ without some significant capacity there. So that kind of raised our eyebrows and got us thinking, wonder if something's up with the defending champ. Just something to keep in mind, and we'll reference that again later in this broadcast. All right, let's talk about Ride on the women's side. Oh, Canada! It was Canada and Canada in first position and second position. Young Emma Lawson gets her first ever CrossFit Games event win with a win on Ride, and Emily Rolfe, also of Canada, takes the number 2 spot. Let's talk about event 2, the pig chipper. We had a pyramid of pig flips, chest to bar pull-ups, toes to bar, and wall ball shots. So you go up and then you go back down with the wall ball shots in the middle. Roman Khrennikov, podium finisher from last year, actually competing for the United States this year because he cannot compete as a Russian athlete due to international sanctions. Well, he takes the event win here. This is right up Roman's alley. Classic CrossFit, chipper style, multiple movements, a mix of weights and gymnastic movements, and you really got to keep the pace consistent throughout. Not surprised to see him take the top spot here. It really goes to show Khrennikov is in fine form. He's a name that had come up as a potential not only podium contender, but potential fittest man on earth. So we're going to be paying close attention to Roman throughout the weekend. On the women's side, the winner of the pig chipper is a very familiar name. Multi-time CrossFit Games podium finisher, Laura Horvath. Now, here's the thing about Laura. She's always had a few gaps that some thought kept her from being the fittest woman on earth. Handstand push-ups notable among them. But let's be honest, the main thing keeping Laura Horvath from being the fittest woman on earth over the last few years has been Tia-Clair Toomey, who's not competing this year. So Laura Horvath really showcasing her fitness, really showing that if you have that classic CrossFit mix of weights and gymnastic movements, and you got to push the pace from start to finish, yeah, she's the woman to beat this weekend. So event number 3 was the inverted medley, and traditionally this is something very high skill, very gymnastic that we've seen actually on the second or last day of competition for individuals at the CrossFit Games. But the programmers decided to put it first this year, and this thing had everything: handstand walks, pirouettes, freestanding handstand push-ups, pullovers. I mean, you're upside down basically the entire time. But basically, super high skill gymnastic movements. It just goes to show the high level of proficiency all of these athletes have on high skill gymnastic movements, because they're basically all expected to be able to perform this workout to completion. And even just a few years ago, some of these movements would have been out of the question, even at the CrossFit Games. It's a good illustration of the sport's evolution. Let's talk about how the men did. On the men's side, Cole Grieshaber of CrossFit Lee's Summit takes the event win. Second on the inverted medley, there's Justin Medeiros. Good to see him. He hadn't finished in the top 20 in either of the first two events. Here is the two-time defending champion actually gaining some ground and making some points on day one. Oh, and by the way, on event number 2, the pig chipper, Justin Medeiros finished way back of the pack in 37th. So the two-time defending champion clearly has some ground to make up and had fans, spectators, even announcers wondering, is he injured? Something seems to be off with Justin Medeiros. On the inverted medley, obviously he's making up some points and showing that he's great upside down, but heading into day 2, or at least day 2 of the individual competition, some big questions about Justin Medeiros' fitness and form coming into this competition. In first place on the women's side, a name that's very familiar to longtime fans of the sport, perennial top 10 competitor, Danielle Brandon. Now, she finished in 21st and 21st on the first 2 events, so definitely a good sign to see Danielle make up some ground and accrue some points here. Now let's talk about overall standings on day 1 of individual competition. Just 3 events, plenty of points left in play over the course of the next 3 days. But in first place overall on the men's side, we've got Roman Khrennikov. He's a podium finisher from last year. He's representing the United States this year. He is someone who folks thought could make a move not only at the podium again, but at the overall title of fittest man on earth. And he's come out of the gates really strong. 21 points behind Khrennikov, still very much in moving position, is Jay Crouch of Australia. The Games veteran has performed consistently on the first 3 events so far, and he's placed himself in really spitting distance of Roman, depending on how the next few events shake out. 21 points is not a lot in the grand scheme of the CrossFit Games. It's also worth noting that Jay Crouch finished in the top 10 on all 3 events on day 1. It's a good way to start the games. Spencer Panchik of the United States, a member of the Panchik family CrossFit Games dynasty, sits in third with 225 points. He's clearly in very good form this year. By the way, his older brother Scott, who burst onto the scene over a decade ago, it's his first year competing as a Masters athlete. Some other big names and veterans to note in the top 10 on the men's side: Patrick Vellner, Brent Fikowski, and Björgvin Karl Gudmundsson, all sitting in top 10 position. Let's talk about the women's side standings after day 1. Alexis Raptis, the 24-year-old American, sits in first place overall with very consistent finishes across the first 3 events. Actually, Alexis has been the model of consistency with top 5 finishes on the first 3 events. That's pretty indicative of a high level of fitness, skill, and strength. We're going to have our eyes on her all weekend. Has the American already established herself as the person to beat this weekend? Emily Rolfe of Canada sits in second place, and Arielle Lowen of the United States sits in third place. Emma Lawson of Canada sits in fourth, and nipping at their heels is a name, well, we've heard this name for almost 15 years at the CrossFit Games. That's Annie Thorisdottir of Iceland. Remember, last year she actually took the year and competed as a team representing her gym, CrossFit Reykjavik. This year she's back as an individual, looking to improve or at least match her podium performance from 2021 when she came back the year after giving childbirth. Actually, not even a year after giving birth, came back and made the podium. Can she come back and do it again this year? She's sitting in 5th after 1 day of competition. Annie's an athlete we're used to seeing move a little later in competitions and make those big moves on Saturdays and Sundays. So I'm really excited to see it, and we're cheering for the original daughter, as they like to say, Iceland Annie Thorisdottir, sitting in 5th place, showing that even though she's been competing in the sport at the highest level since 2009, she's still a mega relevant name. Now let's talk about Laura Horvath for a second. She's sitting in 7th place, but she performed very well in the first 2 events, not so well in the 3rd event. But is that really a bad thing for Laura Horvath? We know one of her weaknesses has always been when things get inverted. Handstand push-ups, handstand walks. It's just not the thing she's best at. Now, the fact that the inverted medley is over, the fact that that's the event most likely that had the highest concentration of upside down movement all weekend, could spell good things for Laura because she's still in 7th place overall. It didn't knock her back out of the top 10 after day 1. 7th place is still very much moving position, so expect the multi-time podium finisher and the person some thought was positioned to inherit Tia-Clair Toomey's crown. Well, expect her to make some moves, and I wouldn't be surprised if she cracked the top 5 after day 2, but there's a lot of fitness to be had and a lot of events to be seen. We are recapping the age group and adaptive divisions from the 2023 Noble CrossFit Games. There were a lot of divisions, and I want to be clear, we're not going to be able to list the podium for each and every one of them because we're talking nearly 30 divisions, and well, we don't have a 40-minute video to do that in. Full results are going to be on barbend.com, so make sure to check those out at the link below. All right, let's address an elephant in the room, and that's the fact that the video coverage of the age group and adaptive divisions at this year's CrossFit Games was a little disappointing. It got to the point where CrossFit CEO Don Fall actually had to address the fact that, well, there wasn't a ton of great video coverage, at least not compared to the individual and teams divisions. It's worth noting there are a lot of age groups and there are a number of adaptive divisions. A lot of these events run simultaneously across different venues. And frankly, CrossFit just doesn't have the capacity, according to CEO Don Fall, to film all of these in dynamic angles, multi-camera setups, etc. There are 18 age group divisions and 6 adaptive divisions. That's 24 divisions. That's a lot of podium finishers, and I'm not even that good at math. Here's the good news. We have coverage of all of these, not necessarily in this video, but all of them in detail on barbend.com. So while we didn't add a lot of camera capacity to this year's coverage when it comes to these divisions, we added a ton of writing capacity. We have been covering these like the Dickens. Do people still say that? Probably not. If nothing else, please check out that coverage at the link below or at barbend.com. Again, there we've got full coverage of every age group division and every adaptive division. We think it's important, and we were really enjoying ourselves as we watched those divisions. We're able to highlight some of those stories, even highlight which athletes out of those divisions had to withdraw for whatever reason. The individuals started off with 3 events today. The team started off with just 2. The first event they started off with was 2-2-2-2 Redux, where teams had to accumulate 175 overhead squats while doing a bunch of other stuff in the middle. We can go ahead and list that workout on the screen so you can get an idea of it. Event number 2 was a little similar to individual event number 1, Ride Relay. Teams had 2 bikes and had to complete a number of laps in an hour. Well, let's talk about standings for the teams after day 1 of competition. CrossFit Invictus, that's a name I've been hearing a lot over the last decade, sits in first place overall. CrossFit Oslo Navy Blue sits in second. And CrossFit East Nashville Proven, PRVN, that is the training program and general fitness ecosystem run by Tia-Clair Toomey and Shane Orr, the married couple. You've heard of them. They sit in third place overall. So there you have it. The individual and team action from Thursday, the first day for those 2 divisions at the 2023 Noble CrossFit Games. It's the last year the CrossFit Games will be in Madison, as far as we know. A lot of exciting things going on, including a defending champ on the men's side who seems to have fallen way back in the pack and has a lot of room to cover. And on the women's side, we have a wide open field. It's really anyone's ball game this year with so few top 10 competitors from last year back and performing and competing this year. So we will have a new fittest woman on earth. It seems like we may have a new fittest man on earth, but we're going to have to wait until Sunday for those final results. Until then, I'm David Tao with barbend.com. Make sure to tune in to barbend.com for event coverage and all of the action all weekend long. Thanks for tuning in.